Raj Tilwa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, William. Pumped to be here.
All right, it's a virtual episode, so for our audience that is that is watching the video version of this podcast, we're excited to do a virtual run for season 2 this summer. Raj Tilwa is the co-founder and co-CEO of Focal, and we're gonna dive right into asking him why you came up with this name and what is Focal's gonna be focusing on.
Amazing. Well, William, I'm really excited to be here and talk to you and share a little bit more about what we've been up to at Focal. We're previously called Beam, but we went through that change a couple of weeks ago, so folks might recall us from our old name. But no, I mean the origin story is a long one, but I love to talk about it because I think it's always fun to know how things started. So I grew up in India, Gujarat from the west part, and just like grew up in places where like not very energy abundant, as the developed countries tend to be, and I remember like dragging mattresses into my parents' bedrooms, during like summer months because their bedroom was the only room that had any sort of cooling, and then when I went to Singapore as well, like space-based heating cooling was not the norm. I was there for high school, but when I came to the States in college, I was just blown away. You walk into any room, you can just assume that there's like centralized heating and cooling, and early on. No, and then this is the same thing. My co-founder, he's also, like we both went to the same elementary school back in India. We both were roommates in Singapore for high school and boarding school, and then we both came to the States together in 2012. So parallel stories from that same time. But both of us were just like blown away as folks who are very climate conscious and just thinking a lot about okay, like what, like how do we drive down emissions, how do we do things differently. Initially when we came to the States, we're like, oh, this is a massive luxury, but we quickly started realizing that this is extremely energy intensive and extremely expensive, and at the same time people are actually complaining about being uncomfortable in those spaces. So something just didn't sit well with us, and this actually ended up becoming a personal problem for us too. We would like share rooms with like our partners, or with like other people we were living with, and we would see that when anytime we had different thermostat preferences, we would have these thermostat wars. But there was just no way for us to actually think about, okay, like what is the most energy efficient way in which we should make the solution, because the paradigm that we have today is you heat spaces as a way to heat people, and that sort of like got us thinking, hey, like, okay, are there ways in which we can focus heat only to where people are, give real control to people to actually communicate to our systems, get instant feedback and the level of comfort that they're experiencing, and really just stop overheating spaces and wasting a lot of energy. So that was our initial idea, and we're just like, hey, like let's just not heat spaces. Let's just heat people where they are when they're there to the levels that they want to be heated. So that's how we started and came up with this idea. You also asked me about like why the name Focal. So we are building a radiant heating system. So radiation as a form of heating people is really important, and this is brings out a little bit like nerdy side of both me and Rohan, is that the focal point is actually a really important form of control that we have. When we think about like how we actually transmit radiant heat to people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the name comes from. And we're also a lot about let's just focus heat to people. So there's also that
Mm-hmm.
aspect about like focal focusing, just gets you to think about that. So
Yeah.
we take it as like strong, talks a lot about the tech and what we're doing, but also talks about the purpose and the function that we serve as well.
Absolutely. Well, diving in, you said that this was, focusing on radiation heating. What is specifically how is the heat being projected more efficiently at a much smaller area, right, than what our traditional, heating systems have been?
Yeah, great point. So, if you, there are three forms of, ways in which we heat people: conduction, convection, and radiation. So conduction is, there's something that's hot, you touch that, you also get to be hot, and I think that's how, like our jackets serve that purpose, electric blankets, some of those that, or, even our like seats that you might be sitting on car, like they also serve that purpose. Convection is, of course, like air based, airflows that, result in that type of heating. That's what you typically tend to see in, most spaces that you're in. And then the third is, radiation. And, radiation is like infrared, like the sun heats us, right? Like through like broad spectrum infrared. And you also see infrared being used to heat, you might have seen those space heaters, sometimes they have, infrared. You also, anytime you've dined, at a restaurant or somewhere, there's infrared too. There are like radiant panels that are installed in homes as well. So that's the approach that we're taking in terms of, using, like radiation as a way to, focus heat to people. And the big difference here is, right, like all of these systems that we talk about, like conduction, yes, by virtue of, how it is, like it'll only heat whatever it's touching. Right, so I think like that is good. Convection, there's just no way for you to actually control airflows, right, because air just goes anywhere.
And
So
that's the
you and
traditional method.
exactly, right, like it's your, like your ducted systems, it's your, mini splits, your heat pumps, all of these are using convection as a way to, like provide heat to users. uh,
Hmm.
and and radiation, today we're sort of like using this like very indiscriminate way of, like directing heat, right, like you're just like heating a massive space,
A heat
and then
lamp,
hoping that some of it lands on people, yeah, like a heat lamp
right?
or any, but like it's not user aware at all. And how do you actually minimize, like the area or the square footage or the volume of, air that you're heating, because you don't really need to overheat, like every single thing. So
Hmm.
we've come up with a proprietary, like technology where we are able to get, like perfect beam formation so that we minimize heat loss,
Okay.
around a person. So it's, imagine, I think the best and cleanest way to think about this is think about this as it's a spotlight, but for heat. So you might have seen like a
Hmm.
stage light, in a theater. How it like follows a person and like moves around. That's
Hmm.
exactly how, our system also operates. Like we just know where you are. We're on our two-axis gimbal.
Yeah.
We're using sense of fusion as a way to know, where people are, and like what their orientation is, and we also give actual control in the hands of people to communicate to our
Hmm.
system.
So, how efficient is this relative to what we currently have? And also, how efficient, as you mentioned, you said, we're going to be able to keep this directly on, let's say, a person, and heat only that person or that small area. How much more efficient would this be relative to a traditional system? You're in a room, let's say a couple hundred square feet room. You're moving about, and the whole room is warm versus keeping this beam essentially on that person as they move.
Yeah, no, great point. And so this looks very different, based on, the type of space that you're in, because, we're used to using, a very different system for different types of spaces. The good
Hmm.
thing is we can be deployed both indoors and outdoors. So that's a big unlock for our system. You don't really see convective systems outdoors, right?
Hmm.
And the way we work indoors is that we want to, keep spaces cooler, but then only focus heat, towards people. So a lot of our energy efficiencies that we get is from thermostat setbacks. So, for example, William,
Hmm.
you and I could be in the same room, we would, have our thermostat be at 72. But I'm the one who's been in California the last couple of years, and I've gotten weaker, and I'm less like I just need more heat. So perhaps, so the way our system would do, and you're like, hey, Raj, like I can be in a 65, like I don't really need more heat. I will communicate to the system that, hey, like I need more heat.
Hmm.
And what will happen, in this case is, if we didn't have that, the one who is like more sensitive will basically be like, no, 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 I need my heat, I need my comfort. So we would, oftentimes end up at a 72. But in this case, we can lower the thermostat to 65. That's like 7 degrees, like less of heating that our system, the centralized system, needs to do.
Hmm.
Um, and we're using, like very low power, spot heating system, which is what we're doing to just like give me focused heat. And there's a lot of research that shows that every degree of temperature that gets lowered in a space, and it depends on what type of space you're in, but you can expect like 3% energy savings. So like that
30%, you said?
three 3%, 1 degree lower gives you 3% in energy
I
savings.
see.
Yeah, but it depends. There's like, many combinations, like what's your insulation levels, there's, what kind of heat system you're using, but that's a, like rough, sense to think about. So that's how we're giving, energy savings, cost savings, and, better
Mhm.
comfort indoors. And then outdoors, you might be familiar with, like propane heaters, which are,
Mhm.
those like tower lamps, you switch
Mhm.
out propane tanks. They're indiscriminately, like casting, like a broad like perimeter or like circumference of heat around it. Compared to those, we are from an emission standpoint, those propane heaters are 21 times more emittive compared to our heating systems. And from an efficiency of just like power alone,
Mhm.
like those systems tend to be like 48,000, 50,000 BTU systems. Our heat system, like max power that we pull, gets to like 10,000 BTUs max. So we're 20%, um, like using less 20% less amount of heat. And the other thing is, from a cost saving standpoint as well, that translates very directly to cost savings too. From our earlier pilots as well, we are 20% of the cost of operating compared to
Mhm.
propane heaters. And if you're using natural gas or like radiant electric heating systems, it's less savings because those systems are less emittive than propane heaters are. But compared to any radiant electric heating system that you see, we are like half
Yeah.
the cost to operate today, just by virtue
Yeah.
of heating people, not spaces.
Yeah. I think when people think about, you know, uh, as you mentioned, right, this is radiation technology. I think people can get spooked by certain technologies. And so when you're thinking about radiation, I think there was one famous Silicon Valley, the HBO show episode where I think they were at TechCrunch or Crunch
Yeah.
Tech.
Yep.
Uh, and then one of the startup pitches was we created this heater using microwaves, and if you want to test it on stage on our interns that we'd like. Obviously that was a joke, it's a TV
Yep.
show, but you know how can you perhaps assuage a consumers concerns? Oh, this is using radiation, or is this safe, right? Is there an upper limit to the beam, for example? What if in this day and age a hacker hacked into a technology and be like and messed around with the systems? What is this kind of like safety and security around such technologies?
Yeah. I mean, that's I'll answer your question, but I have to talk about the Silicon Valley episode where they talk about this. Of course, we know about this episode, and it was hilarious. Like for us, that we came to a similar premise in terms of what we want to do, but like of course not using microwave to cook people. And our last summer when we onboarded our team, post our raise, one of the first things that we did in our like big kickoff meeting was all of us watched that clip together, because being like, hey, like every single time you tell people what you're doing, and people who are familiar with the show are going to like joke about that, and you're just like, are you
Yeah.
doing, is that what you're doing? But no, I think talking in a more serious way, right? Like safety is super important, right? Like we're doing this for like better like human health outcomes, not only better planetary outcomes.
Hmm.
Radiant heat is how we've been getting heated for millions and millions of years, right? Like ever since sun has been there, you step outside, that's how you're getting heated. Anytime you feel that like warmth of sun, the problem is sun is actually bad for you because it has UV,
Of
right?
course.
Our system is like there's like no UV. It's entirely, our emitters are designed to emit only infrared. and like infrared that is
Mhm.
like good for your skin and for your comfort. So
Mhm.
that's where sort of like our system comes in. And yes, we are a and sorry, before I even go to control and like cybersecurity aspects that you mentioned here,
Yeah.
um, like this is like there are researchers at UC Berkeley Center for the Built Environment that are like exploring like many ways in which radiant heat could be used. There are universities in India and other places as well that have um, are experimenting many different things with radiant heat. So I think from that standpoint, like it's extremely safe. And anytime that you see you're getting heat from distance that is not air based, it's oftentimes it's radiant heat.
Mhm.
From a cybersecurity standpoint, we take this very seriously. Like using like software and coding tools, and and protecting our databases as well in the best way that we're able to. Having them be compliant is something that has been top of mind for us. And I think as we mature and have more deployments, it will be something that we'll keep thinking about. But the good thing is these are not like unknown things. Like many people have built even much more impactful software enabled systems that
Mhm.
this cybersecurity is just a table stakes aspect that we just can't negotiate.
Absolutely. Now, where at what point, for your company are you now, right? What your pre-seed you've mentioned you raised last year.
Mhm.
Tell us about a little bit, if you can, like how much you raised, and kind of like for a lot of the listeners who might be interested in an entrepreneur themselves, what was the runway experience like for your trajectory, and where are you now in terms of ultimately what all startups want: sales, revenue, right? How has the business grown?
Yeah, no, great question. So we raised last summer, in May we raised almost 2 million. We haven't publicly announced yet. We've just been super heads down in terms of just building and getting as
Yeah.
much like readiness in with our customers, and just getting our product to a point where we can start onboarding customers. And we've actually started doing that. So our first product is actually targeting the outdoor hospitality market,
Mm.
and so we're starting with restaurants
Hmm.
as our beachhead customer out here in the Bay Area. That's where we're based in Oakland, and we're actually in month 3 with our first customer, and we're deploying to 3 more customers actually in the next 2 weeks. So our plan right now is to deploy to a handful of customers. These are all right, like paid deployments. From a customer standpoint, there's like, hey, like
Hmm.
we're getting you know real value from this service, and
Yep.
heating is tables for us. And we also want to simplify our operations, and we want to give a distinguished experience to our customers. So that's what, or their diners.
Yep.
So we're actually doing a lot of in-house prototyping and design. We're building our units ourselves in our in our facilities. We're
Hmm.
testing them, and we're the ones who are actually also deploying and installing these systems too, because that early repetitions are super super important for us to actually understand the full customer journey, the full product life cycle. Because eventually when we hand this off to contract manufacturers, or even for certification, safety certifications, which are
Right.
very important for products, or electronic products,
Yep.
we need to get those reps in. And we've been using a lot of our runway over the last year to bring on an incredibly scrappy mission oriented team that really wants to build a product that makes a difference in the world, and getting more and more reliability on our systems. We started with day-long pilots last fall, at a handful of restaurants, because that's what our heating subsystem could handle. Then we progressed on to week-long installation in December, and in March we were ready to start committing to permanent installations at customers. So every quarter, we've demonstrated like a step change improvement
Hmm.
in how our system is being designed and how it's performing. And we're getting to a point where we'll stable out soon. Like our learnings from doing all this work in house, they
Right.
will flatten out. But we've been in this mode of just like exponential learning by keeping all these things in house. And what that has enabled us to do is be super frugal with like how we're using resources, not committing to
Yeah.
tooling and expensive DFM efforts with manufacturers until we
Okay.
build the conviction on our launch product and our product requirements documentation. And
Yeah.
we are getting there, and we're gearing up to do a formal product launch in the second half of this year.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it seems now, obviously, in the summer, heat is less relevant, but of course, cyclical weather. So, come fall and winter is when your product will be perhaps even most useful. Um,
Well, it's actually a really interesting point there. Our like markets like the Bay Area, where even you might have a big daily temperature difference, right? So like
mhm.
mornings are cool or evenings are cool, but like
Yeah.
middays are very hot.
Right.
Like for those we get almost like year-round heating needs for those markets, and I think like
Interesting.
that's something to think about. But yes, I think like some of our markets like the Midwest or even the East Coast, yes, like summer months for outdoor
Yeah.
heating specifically, like there might not be those needs. But no, you're totally right. We're gearing up for a big season of efficient heating later this year.
Absolutely. Now, for your business model,
Hmm.
you're how do you know like ultimately you're selling this product, you're installing these techs. What's kind of like the business model? Is it like SaaS? Is it product? Like what makes sense for Focal in your mind?
Yeah, great question. For our customers, the biggest value for our restaurant customers, our hospitality customers, the biggest value that they're looking at us to provide for them is that we're essentially an extension of their service staff, right? Like we're there to provide this like optimal comfort. Their staff doesn't have to worry about switching out propane tanks, turning these heaters on and
Oh,
off,
it's very true.
like moving them around. So we're like, let us take care of like your front of the house service needs from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And we're the only software powered heating system out there in the market, and
Hmm.
because of the value we're providing, and the ongoing compute that we're doing as well, we're charging a no upfront hardware but an ongoing like subscription fee is what we're doing
Yeah,
with our daily customers.
that makes sense.
Mhm.
um do you feel that this revenue model, because we talked about the cyclicality of it, it's going to be heavily needed in the winter. Does the model hold, would it hold consistent for a whole year? Would people buy a year's subscription, or would they like, oh, we would only need it for the winter months, let's say, and then say, can we like not have it for the summer? What's kind of, and then would you take away the equipment, right, if they stopped using it, for example, and costs related to installation, uninstallation? um, what's kind
Yeah,
of the
great
risks?
questions. So the the cyclicality is interesting, right? Like we are experimenting different business models as well, in terms of doing a usage based model for the summer months, as well, just to give the restaurant the option for like a random cold day that might occur, right? Like if
Yeah.
that happens and you don't have anything, that could be like $1,000, $2,000 in like revenue that you don't get. And in that case,
Right.
right, like paying a
That day
baseline
alone.
fee, like I think that single day can like pay off like
Yeah.
like like a lot of things. I think for us, that's something. And these customers do this simple like cost benefit analysis on the
Yeah.
fly. Like they know their business super well. They are keeping tabs on these like top line and bottom line numbers super closely. So actually our
Right.
conversations with them are like pretty simple when it comes to some of this. The point about do we need to install like uninstall if you're not using them? One thing that we have always thought about when we were designing our product is that it needs to be beautifully designed. It needs to be aesthetically pleasing. And our system, even if it's not operational, actually elevates the parklet design, or your outdoor patio design. So even in the months when you're not using it, there's no issue in leaving these systems up there.
Hmm.
And if you were to remove them, they're as simple as like a light bulb change. So if you can easily take them off and move, put them aside if you wanted
Hmm.
to. But our recommendation, for our customers would be to leave them
Yeah,
on, because you never know, when someone might need that additional heat. And
of
from
course.
users, and when we've done user surveys, we have heard often that like sometimes I want extra heat, but just don't have any options, and that results in them leaving, or them that results in them not seating.
I see. And as you mentioned, right, you're testing with restaurants now, but as we learn in entrepreneurship, you want to capture a big part of the market ideally. What is the big market potential for your company, right? What's the volume? What's the market cap, perhaps?
William, love that question. And it's something, as you might recall from our inception story, right? We started here because there are many spaces and moments in your daily life when you have been uncomfortable. And our thesis is that in those moments, we need to empower the user, empower the consumer, empower the person to actually demand the comfort that they're looking for. And anytime they make that choice, results in emissions reductions. And that's the fundamental premise behind which how we're designing this. So we want to be anywhere where people are spending time, and they're not getting adequate comfort. What we have started seeing, from our even our early deployments at restaurants, is that
Mhm.
anytime we survey a user, they ask us, when can they have one in their homes? When can they have one in their office spaces? When can they have one, like in their like backyard patio? When can they have one in their garage or their basement? So then we're already getting, these, like
Yeah.
polls from, consumers. But we're also like hearing from other markets, be it like hotels,
Mhm.
restaurant, bigger restaurant chains, ski resorts, of like other spaces where they also need this very analogous product. So we're in the next few months, we're actually going to start rolling out some early pilots, with few folks to start understanding what are some of their user patterns, what are some of their buyer patterns, and how can we actually scale our product to multiple verticals with the same analogous product.
Well, that's a big market, as you said. There's so many places you can cover. I think we want to talk not only about your potential, but also a little bit of what's the competition. Let's say big heat. As an industry, HVAC, traditional heating systems. Why haven't they simply invented something more efficient? Perhaps why haven't they having made this or perhaps tried to solve this problem already?
That's a great question. And I think we're against different competitors, indoors and
Okay.
outdoors.
Different
So
methods. Yep.
yeah, different methods of heating, right? So I think one of the biggest you know drivers indoors is that you still need like some level of space heating, right? Because you have water running through, you have like
Yep.
other things that like also that your buildings need to be kept at a certain temperature. So space-based heating is not going anywhere, and I'm like a huge fan of everyone who's working on heat pumps and getting them out there, because it's such an incredibly efficient way. People who are working on
Yep.
like better insulation, I think we need these solutions. Yet none of those solve this individualizing of heating problem. And I think
Mhm.
like how do you actually enable a paradigm where you are able to focus heat and result in that like additional emissions reduction. And honestly, the biggest reason why this has not been done is there's a way in which our spaces are designed that actually thinking about like how do you take a design first approach to reimagine
Mhm.
comfort. No one has really taken that. And the other thing is computer vision, like sensor fusion, learning algorithms. how do you, intelligently control and dynamically control, the different systems in a space? Like these are all newer things that, were not something that was possible, to
Hmm.
do, even, like a couple years ago. So we're taking advantage of, a lot of those, advances and bringing, a cross-disciplinary way of, we have on our team, my co-founder Rohan, he is a mechanical engineer by training. He went to Tesla and Zoox, he was an engineer. And then he went to Carnegie Mellon to get his master's in robotics, right? So he's bringing that
Wow.
cross-disciplinary, like tech stack into how do we bring that
Hmm.
and apply this to this problem.
Yeah. What is so, speaking of Rohan, your co-founder, your partner in this
Mhm.
venture, a lot of entrepreneurs want to, figure out that step. Do they go at something alone? Do they bring on a partner? Do they bring on two or maybe even three partners? You have success stories across the board. For yourself, for Focal, why was it critical to do this? Was a co-founder for yourself?
Yeah, Rohan and I have known each other for such a long time. We're both passionate about this problem of
Hmm.
doing our part, to mitigate climate impact. And founder journey, solo founder journey is really tough. And I think like for us, like it was not even something that, we entertained, like it was an idea that we had that, we discussed collectively when a few weeks after Rohan had officiated my wedding, my wife and I went to see him in Pittsburgh.
Wow.
And, that's when we first discussed this, and how, and, my wife was the first guinea pig, where we tested out, current forms of, focusing and, like
Ah,
localizing heat.
a brave
And
volunteer.
that like, like the current methods actually have a big user experience issue. So that's where, we were there from the inception. And honestly, I wouldn't change this for the world and for anything. And it's just been the best experience ever to have someone with your side who understands, the highs and the lows and, everything it takes to, like be in between and get to those, highs and lows, and
Yeah.
someone that you can trust on. And the other thing is, we're extremely complementary in skill set and, how
Hmm.
we show up, to any conversation, yet we're able to understand what the other person is thinking, and, we can preempt their thought. And I think that has been a beautiful, beautiful gift that we have.
Well, you do definitely have very complementary your skill sets. He's highly technical experience, and you have the business acumen. But I'm curious about this podcast is interviewing Harvard alums. You're recent, just graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School. Where does the Kennedy School come into this? Because you're wonderful. You're about to graduate from the Stanford graduate of Stanford School of Business, Graduate School of Business, Harvard Business School's friendly rival friend. Um, but why was policy or why was the Kennedy School education important to kind of this entrepreneurial journey that you've undertaken?
That's a great question. I love talking about this, and it's incredibly important for me to share how I approach or how I think about, systems level issues. It's a known fact that climate change is happening, and, anything that we need to do, we
Of
need
course.
public sector, private sector, social sector to come together to, really make this change happen. And Kennedy School was foundational in terms of, for someone who didn't have that much experience, working in the public sector. I'd been adjacent to the public sector, be it through the Greater Washington Partnership, and even, in my as a management consultant, spent a lot of time thinking about the role of the public sector. But Kennedy School gave me a really good knowledge in terms of how do you design policies, how do you get policies through, and how do you think about communities and the people who are impacted at the center of, any design of a solution or a service that you might be thinking about. So grounding me into that was super important. And as someone who fundamentally believes in the power of a consumer, and I think about the consumer as a voter and a voter as a consumer, right? And I think oftentimes if you can provide real value to customers, consumers, raise their awareness about, how they can adopt better solutions, better ways of living that actually results in impact that is beneficial for the planet and, future generations and their
Yeah.
communities. That is an incredibly important aspect that Kennedy School really ingrained in me, and I think that has formed the foundation of, like all the work that we've done. And as I had mentioned, right, like one of the hardest things about how our spaces are designed, like codes
Yeah.
are going to be really important.
Yeah.
How do you work with, like local regulatory agencies, because, so much of, like building codes are dependent on different states. So having that know-how of, like who are the right stakeholders, how do you think about their interests, and how do you speak to them in their language is extremely important for us to have the big impact that we want to have. So Kennedy School is foundational to and extremely complementary to the entrepreneurial journey that I'm on and my long-term ambitions of how we're going to actually make change happen.
Absolutely. As we're kind of approaching the tail end of the podcast, I think what are some, of the hardest challenges that you've experienced, since you've started this startup? We often, see the success stories, but, people don't see the bumps, the climbs, the crevices that, people face as they're moving on this journey of entrepreneurship. For yourself and your co-founder, perhaps, what has been some of the biggest challenges that people don't know or wouldn't maybe think about as they're starting their journey?
Yeah, and there are so many. And as you were saying, the one that jumped out to me was the amount of unknowns that you
Hmm.
have to deal with is incredibly high. And you can have the best plan. And you can think about this plan for, you know, like weeks. And even when you go to that customer site, for your first installation, something new
Yeah.
is going to happen.
Mm.
And like when you are faced with, like something new, like, what do, right? Like you can blame you can like blame yourself, and that, and in the early days, like that's all you have is like blame yourself, or blame your co-founder, and you don't want to be in that game. And sort of this like yes but philosophy that people have, or oh shit, what's happening, like the world is ending.
Yeah.
We've had like many of those moments, but one thing that has helped us be better is really taking on this philosophy of this happened, so what are we going to do next? So the sort of the I think I love to think about improv. Improv is all about yes and you just have to keep building off of each other, and instilling that way of thinking into everything that we're doing at the company has been extremely, extremely helpful, and has gone through very tough moments, and being very judicious about what you have control over. What are the known knowns, what are the known unknowns, and
Yeah.
just like focus on those. And if something happens,
Yeah.
that you have a great partner with you in this journey. You have great investors around the table, and you have an incredible team who is willing to do whatever it takes to bring this vision to life.
Well, that's perfect. I think that's a wonderful way to close off this episode of the podcast. Raj, thank you so much for your time, your insights, and hopefully for our audience, a little bit, a few more lessons in their chest to build their own ventures if that's what they want to pursue.
Thanks, William. It was great to chat.